everyone. I hope your week has been good so far. If you don't know me, my name's Ben. I work with an organization on campus called University Christian Outreach. You've probably seen some of the stuff that we've done. And I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed the warm weather that we've been having. So if you haven't already, go do something nice outside, like go for a walk or something. I don't know. Just get outside. We're not going to have this for long. But anyways, for today, we're going to talk about the power of community. But rather than talk about it from a typical way, we're going to look at it from a different angle, from the perspective of loneliness. So Henry Nouwen, a prolific writer of the 20th century, wrote about loneliness in his book called Reaching Out. And he states, ironically, that even in community, we can feel lonely. He points out that even though we may have friends and even a romantic relationship, we can still feel lonely. And why is this? Well, he says that when we seek to connect with other people out of the loneliness and the loneliness in our hearts, that hoping that our relationship with them will satisfy us, then we're left even more lonely than when we began. Not that just we're lonely even though we have friends, but we're left even more lonely because we're seeking that relationship, hoping that they'll satisfy us. And so now it claims that no one will ever solve our loneliness, at least not as long as we're friends with them, because of the self-seeking desire that they'll cure our loneliness. So I want to ask you, before we begin, have you ever found yourself experiencing the loneliness? I'm sure you've probably experienced it in a variety of ways. I don't need to dive into all of them. But even the crazy thing is, like, you can go to be at like an amusement park or something, right? And you're amidst this crowd of people, and yet you feel like you're the only one on the face of the earth. That kind of describes that loneliness is pretty much a universal feeling in humanity. It's just central to something that we experience as people. And we often hear talks, if you've grown up in the church, or if you've been around Huntington long enough, we hear talks about community, and we hear how they idealize it and paint this wonderful, beautiful picture. If you just do this, this, and this, you'll experience this life-giving, rich community. Or you hear people at Huntington talk about it like, yeah, I love the community here. And you're like, what community, And so sometimes we can kind of get discouraged when we hear a talk about community, because we feel alone. All of us do. Even the people who seem like they have it going on and they have tons of friends. Everyone across the board experiences loneliness. And so, maybe then we try to make more friends after hearing this talk on community. We get up enough courage to go talk to that new person or that person that sits next to us in our class. But eventually, as every relationship does, you experience hardship of a difference of opinion, or they start to annoy you, they chew their gum really loudly, whatever. And you experience the reality of relationships. Or sometimes we hear a talk on community and we think that we've got it going on and we're doing great because we've got lots of friends. The problem with that is that friendship isn't the same as having a community. But the problem with both of these mindsets, right, is that we can feel alone whether or not we have friends. And so what's the solution, right? You're probably okay, great, Ben, tell me what you're thinking. Well, if friends aren't a solution, you can still feel lonely when you have friends, and feeling alone is inevitable to the human condition, then what's the point? Why even try to talk about loneliness? What's the point, right? And so let me share a quick story from when I was a student. I graduated back in 2020 as a worship major. And so as a ministry student, you get to go on a 7-month internship to a church and work there full time. But you have to be 100 miles away from home, 100 miles away from the school. And so I found a church in Cleveland, Ohio. And so while I was there, I probably experienced the most crippling loneliness that I've ever experienced in my entire lifetime. And I'm not even kidding. I had no one there who knew me. I didn't even have family in the area. My friends were 3.5 hours away back at Huntington. My just then girlfriend that I just started dating, who eventually became my wife, Maddie, was the only person that I was like regularly talking to on a weekly basis right around then. And I lived in a house with a single guy and his dog, which they were awesome. But again, like he wasn't there all the time, and the dog is not the same as a human. And so I felt like my loneliness was inescapable. And I remember coming home after church one Sunday just crying on the floor, like in my room, because I just felt so destitute that I couldn't even work up the courage to ask someone to go out to lunch after church that day. And if you know me, you know that I'm a people person. I love hanging out with people, getting to know them. But I was just so lonely that even then I couldn't even work up the courage to say, hey, and would you like to go get some lunch? But this, however, was kind of where the answer came from me as I was reading this book from Henry Nouwen, that he describes turning our loneliness into solitude with God. And he says that's the cure for loneliness. It is there that we stop looking to others to fill us and instead allow God to fill us. And I had to learn that I had to stop putting expectation on others that they had the capability to fill me, or that their job was to fill me or fulfill my loneliness, or to keep me from feeling lonely. And so I needed to recognize that I was created to be filled by one person alone, and that's God. And that he is the only person in the entire human existence that can truly cure and solve our loneliness. But it doesn't look like the same. Like it doesn't always necessarily feel that way at first, right? Like Henry Nouwen describes it as turning our loneliness to solitude. And so as a result, he kind of prescribed some different things, but I started to do a deep dive into prayer during my time there. And I focused first on my relationship with God, and allowed him to fill me in that solitude time. In those moments when I felt lonely, I'd go to God. And over time, as I started to get confidence from that relationship, from just allowing the Lord to look at me and recognize that, okay, God loves me as I am right now. Like I don't need other people necessarily. It actually freed me to go and meet other people from the church. And so as I started meeting other people, right, my first relationship with the Lord was filling me. I allowed myself to be known by them and to get to know them as well. And to this day, the people that I became friends with there, I remain friends with. Well, why is that? Well, it's because I stopped seeking friendship for my own gain. And I started pursuing friendship with others, true community, right? Like in the thick of it, not just like, yeah, we're friends, we sometimes have hard conversations, but like, we're brothers in the fight. I'm calling you, he's calling me at inopportune times, and vice versa. We're in the thick of it together. We're in regular relationships with one another. And my soul really was already filled because of my relationship with God, and it just freed me to have really rich relationships with those around me. So I want to stop and just ask you to reflect on this. Think about your friendships. And how have you been pursuing relationships with others? I'm not just talking romantic relationships. I'm talking platonic as well. You see, 1 Corinthians 13 offers us insight into what our relationships with others are supposed to look like. And yes, even with those whom God has placed around us that annoy us and we get angry with, and probably for whatever reason, they're chewing their gum too loud or whatever, they play music from their room. He says in verse 1, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing." And he says, "Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres." And then jumping to verse 12. "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. What I love about this is Paul describes that even now, even as we pursue loving relationships with others, we can do all of this. And he says, even then, that may not be it, right? He describes what a loving relationship should look like with anyone. But he says it, now I know in part, but then, speaking of when he meets the Lord in heaven, right? I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. To be known by God and to know God. That's our soul's deepest longing. And that's why we can't find true fulfillment in relationships with others. So even now, as we're awaiting the reality of heaven and the fullness of peace with God and each other, let us pursue relationships in this way. Amen.